Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Humane Society of Harrisburg area. Today we're going to talk about Act 24, which we're very excited to introduce today, and thank everyone who was an advocate and contacted their legislators and contact the governor. By working together as a team, we were able to make this vital legislation happen. House Bill 164 was introduced by Representative Todd Stevens and passed the Pennsylvania House unanimously on March 4th and the Senate on June 30th, and was signed by the governor on July 10th, which makes it effective September 10th this year. We at the Humane Society of Harrisburg area are proud to have the opportunity to say Pennsylvania will no longer be a safe haven for animal fighters. I'm going to hand the rest of the presentation over to Representative Todd Stevens and thank him for his leadership on this legislation and making the animals of our community a priority.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy, and thank you so much to the Humane Society of Harrisburg for hosting us today. This is a terrific facility with a lot of cats and dogs here, so anyone who might be interested, please stop by. They're happy to take your application and consider you for to adopt an animal. They certainly could use all your help and support. This legislation could not have come to pass without the help of the Humane Society of the United States as well. We worked very hard last session to bring this legislation to the forefront and got it through the House last session and almost across the finish line in the Senate, and unfortunately it just wasn't to be last session. So we got right back in the saddle this session and immediately went to work, and thanks to their tireless advocacy and efforts, we were able to get this bill signed into law here within almost the first 6 months of this legislative session. So I'm thrilled to have had their support and the benefit of their efforts over the last really 2 years. So, you know, just by way of quick rundown, animal fighting is illegal. Cockfighting and dog fighting is illegal in every state, and there are federal laws to prohibit animal fighting as well. In 41 states, including Pennsylvania, cockfighting is a felony offense. In 37 states, including Pennsylvania, there's a prohibition for possessing animals for the purpose of animal fighting. But now, thanks to this act, we joined 15 other states in prohibiting the possession of animal fighting paraphernalia. And you know, this was a concern because our law enforcement professionals are out there and humane officers are out there every day trying to protect animals, but they can't always come across the scene of the crime as a crime is in process or as a fight is in progress. So in the end, they needed an additional tool for the toolbox, and this law will be just that, an additional tool to help combat animal fighting here in Pennsylvania. So no longer will our law enforcement and humane officers need to come across a fight in progress. They'll be able to, using other evidence, if they can identify tools of the trade that are used specifically for animal fighting, they can hold those folks accountable for possessing those implements or tools of the trade, if you will. You know, there was some concern early on that this might be a little bit too broad and we might capture some folks that are using some implements properly and lawfully with animals. And I used my experience as a prosecutor, and we went, frankly, right to the drug laws here in Pennsylvania, and we have a prohibition against drug paraphernalia. So I very narrowly tailored this legislation, sort of mirroring the drug paraphernalia statute, so that we only focus on those who are illegally using tools of the trade for animal fighting and not for any other lawful purpose that we're okay with. So in the end, you know, it's important that we recognize the challenges associated with investigating and prosecuting these types of cases, and anytime we can add another tool to the toolbox to combat animal fighting in Pennsylvania, I think we should take that step, and that's exactly what this law is. So with that, I want to pass the mic over to Kristen from the Humane Society of the United States, and again, just reiterate my thanks and support, and I just can't thank you enough for all your advocacy and tireless efforts to get this bill across the finish line. Thank you very much for your help.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I was just going to tell a little story about a state trooper who pulls over a vehicle on a highway, and in the back of the vehicle, the state trooper notices that there are sponges, there are buckets, there are wooden blocks, and in the front of the seat there's collars and leashes, and but there's no dog. And so on the same side of another side of town, there's another state trooper pulling over another vehicle, and in the back of that vehicle are metal cages with 4 medium-sized dogs. Unfortunately, at that time, there's no evidence to say that these animals are involved in animal fighting. And so this bill, previously, there were no bans in place for animal fighting paraphernalia, making it very difficult for animal fighters to be caught with the paraphernalia and also with the dogs, or the cockfighting as well. This is also an issue with. Under previous law, there were no ban, and animal fighters were well aware of that. And so what they would do is transport the dogs and the equipment in different vehicles. So when they were caught, it was nearly impossible to prove that they were a part of an animal fighting case. So PA has made great strides with animal fighting, and we do, as advocates, want to thank Representative Todd Stevens for his leadership on giving law enforcement a much-needed tool to identify and eliminate animal fighting in our state. I think the next step is to turn our attention to the last benefit for animal fighting, which is a statewide ban on tethering. This is a very common thing that animal fighters will do, is they'll keep their dogs tethered and as a mean of constraining the animals. And so we are definitely taking a step in the direction of being that model state for Pennsylvania with zero tolerance on animal fighting. And that is, again, thank you to the leadership of Representative Stevens and for Governor Wolf for signing this into law. Thank you very much for being here. And if you have any questions, I think we're open to that now.
Was there any specific case that kind of precipitated making this change
That might be better for you.
Moving forward?
Sure. I learned about it generally. I think Amy may have some specific examples, but just as someone with a law enforcement background, I understand the dynamic of trying to investigate a crime and then ultimately prosecute it and make sure you have enough evidence. So when I heard sort of generally speaking the issue, I moved forward and again modeled the law after the drug paraphernalia laws, but I think Amy might be able to share some specific examples here in the area.
Sure. This honestly has been an ongoing problem since I started. I've been here for almost 10 years, and routinely we will come across situations. I can think of one, probably one of the most egregious was several years ago. We were in the city of Harrisburg, and we were able to observe an actual fighting pit. It was a pit. There was still, blood stains left. It was clearly obvious what was going on there. There was a couple remnants of signs of animals. There was, I believe, feces, some collars, a few bite sticks. And going through the whole trying to track who owned the property, it was pointless. It was absolutely pointless because it didn't matter. We clearly knew a fight had happened there, and then we found some evidence of fights in houses and abandoned houses around the area, but it wouldn't have mattered. We would have had to catch them in the fight, and it was clearly an abandoned situation. And we have come across situations where we'll go into a home where we're getting a complaint maybe just on barking dogs or dogs tied outside, and we see things that raise suspicion, and you can't even get, at the time, you couldn't even get a warrant for that. Because it didn't matter. What are you going to do? If we didn't see or have someone report that they saw or heard a fight in progress, it just really, really tied our hands. So I think as Representative Stevens has indicated, it's another tool, and I can kind of, catalog and recall probably, I would say 20 to 30 cases where we would have had an opportunity to move forward into a full-blown investigation had we had this tool. And now that we do, I'm hoping, we'll be able to move forward in a positive direction.
Another question that kind of came to mind, just obviously being a lay person, I don't know anything about dogfighting. So the average lay person out there, what are some of the things that law enforcement would be looking for? And furthermore, the second part of that question is, how do you differentiate between whether it's being used for a lawful purpose or an unlawful purpose in this case?
Sure, I'll handle the second part of the question, and then maybe Amy can handle the first part. So how do you distinguish? There's a number of different ways you can distinguish. It could be through statements made, through other evidence. You could do a wire and intercept conversations about animal fighting. As we heard here, when there's a scene that's set up and you have people that are experts in the field to say, okay, look, this is a pit. There's only one use for this type of pit. When you see blood and you see other, other evidence, so to speak, of animal fighting, things along those lines, it's really a totality of the circumstances type of analysis where you look at all the evidence. You know, when I was a prosecutor in the courtroom, we used to talk about the difference between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. And a lot of people feel, wrongfully, that circumstantial evidence is not as strong as direct evidence. And the example that the judges used to always give was if you went into a movie theater and it was, sunny day outside, and you came out of the movie theater and there were puddles on the ground and water on all the cars and everything else like that, you didn't necessarily see that it rained, but pretty good evidence that while you were in the movies, it was raining outside. And so, it's really along those same lines. When you look at the totality of the circumstances and you look at all the other pieces of evidence and add them up, then you can come to the conclusion that yes, in fact, there was an animal fight there. And so those are the other types of circumstances and the analysis that would be conducted to ensure that we aren't wrongfully getting to those folks who might, legally and properly be using some implements that others might wrongfully be using as a part of an animal fighting operation. And Amy can get into the details of the specific implements that might be used.
Sure, and I definitely would echo the totality of the circumstances, and you're right, and I do think they've done a good job of providing, solid legislation that makes room for that, hey, somebody could really be, owning these things for legitimate reasons, but you're looking for things like bite sticks, toe chains are very, very popular, where the dog will be required to wear a large collar, and a large chain will be attached to the dog. Seeing multiple of those in multiple varying sizes in a home starts to make you question. The bite stick is a big thing. Oftentimes they use treadmill type devices for the dogs to exercise, where they require them to run for length of time to kind of build stamina and duration. Again, a fighting ring or a ring. Now again, we might not, they're obviously not going to present it as a fighting ring, but a pit-like area that could be used for fighting is something you'd look for. There's also signs that you'd look for on the animals themselves. Animals that have a lot of scarring, both on the face and the front of their body, that's on their ears, that's a very common thing to look for. Look at the actual animals that are under their care. There's a number of drugs that are used, with respect to the animals, so that would be something that we would be looking for. And as silly as it sounds, some people really just are bad criminals, and you will see magazines, articles, how to breed pits for fighting just laying around. If we were able to get to a warrant situation, you're gonna see those things just present in the home, as unbelievable as that might be. So some obvious things and maybe some not so obvious things, but those are just a couple of items, and that would come to the surface for us. And then there's some non-obvious ones, as Kristen was indicating, scrub buckets, a lot of, iodine or betadine and things like that, a lot of medical supplies, more medical supplies than maybe the average owner would have. I mean, of course, all of us that have pets do keep on hand some basic emergency things, but I highly doubt we have sutures, and we're stitching animals up, or surgical drape or things like that. So those are some other things that, again, to go to your point, could be misconstrued, but if you're seeing all these things together, that's when the investigation is going to go to the next level.
One other point to make. There are some that are just plainly obvious, too. During one of our hearings, the Humane Society helped by providing me with gaffs, just little razor-like blades that you would attach to a rooster's leg to inflict more damage on another rooster during a cockfight. I mean, there's no lawful purpose for something like that, and therefore that's easily identified as a tool of animal fighting. So, in the dog fighting world, it might be a little different, because there are some tools that might have legitimate uses. In some of the other fighting situations, it might be just plainly obvious. And so again, a car driving down the street that has all these gaffs and tools, up until this law was enacted, there was no action that could be taken. Couldn't even seize them, because they were properly legally owned. Now they can be seized, and the individual can be prosecuted for possessing them. Anything else? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it.